Welcome to the Enjoy a Cancer-Free Life podcast with Dr. Ted Koren, best-selling author of Cancer is Natural, So is the Cure. More than care for patients, Dr. Koren transforms lives. He teaches people an all-natural way to heal from and address the causes of cancer using the tools we all have within ourselves. On the podcast, Dr. Koren interviews other thought leaders in natural healing who share insights and information to help you live longer and better.
I'd like to introduce everyone to Caroline Blavatsky. Did I say it right? Blazovsky.
Perfect. There you go.
Okay, great. And you were introduced to me by David Boaz, who
That's right.
has worked with you.
Yes, he was a client of mine. Yep, many moons ago. So probably 20 plus years.
So, as you know, my work, my book, Cancer is Natural, So is the Cure, discusses toxicity, both internal and external, as a major form of cancer and chronic illness. And your work seems to dovetail perfectly with that because you deal with toxicity, the toxic home.
That's right.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you got into this field?
So many moons. I've been an environmental consultant for 20 years. So you can appreciate that and understand that it's been a long road. And when I worked in New York City. So I had some allergies and, nothing traumatic, just I had allergies and I'd gone to a physician and I said, look, I developed these allergies. Why did I get them? And they just didn't have an answer. They kind of said, oh, well, you're just going to take a Benadryl, you're going to take an inhaler, and that's your story. So I was a young whippersnapper and I said, that's weird. That doesn't seem right to me. Why all of a sudden did I develop allergies? And I got on the mold side 20 years ago when people didn't know what mold was and they didn't know how it operated. And so I started looking at my environment and we didn't have the internet at the time. And it kind of amazes me that I was able to get the information and start researching it. I was 20-year-old kid. So I started, learning about molds and how they operated. And I said, I think these are contributing to health effects, not only with me, but with other people. And then I just sunk my teeth into it and really wanted to learn about environments and how they influenced us.
So you dealt with your own mold issue and your symptoms changed?
I did. I mean, it wasn't that I had a severe mold issue back then, but I think we had done some remodeling. And then I looked at it and said, that's odd. Like, why would this mold go away and stuffiness go away when this mold was, removed? So, and then it just kind of got me thinking that, well, what other things could possibly, be contributing to our environments? And then the industry has just grown. So, I was starting out when there weren't environmental consultants or healthy home consultants. They just didn't exist back then. I think there was one other woman who I had learned from that was doing it. And so, we just started with mold and then it just progressed. We started doing volatile organics, we started doing mycotoxin, we started doing formaldehydes, we started doing glyphosate. And before you know it, we're looking at this home going, wow, these people are really exposed to all kinds of things every day. And unbeknownst to you, you don't know what's happening. And then you develop symptoms. And then when we remove certain things, people get better. And it doesn't mean that in every case, someone will improve their health. But what we find is it's a general improvement. So even if you have a systemic problem or an autoimmune disease that may not be directly influenced by your current environment, it helps to alleviate the load and the inflammation. And you understand that.
Do you think this has to do, at least in part, with homes being more tightly built now? There's
absolutely, 100%. And we see in the building industry, because I deal a lot with, contractors and building people, the tighter we make these building envelopes, we develop different problems. We have mold, but then we have moisture control issues because you tighten that building envelope, moisture gets trapped, then you get higher dust mites, higher chemicals. It all plays into each other. And then even COVID-19, which is a perfect example, that is also influenced by humidity in a big way. So yes, it all comes into play for sure.
So how do people hire you? Do you work with private homes or just industry?
I work with both. I prefer to do residential. That's always been my love, but I get calls all the time. I just got a call to do a commercial building that's, 35,000 square feet, but I do both, but I prefer residential. That's my claim to fame. And I do a lot. I'm an environmental consultant. So we do testing at My Healthy Home. We do all kinds of testing, from protein testing, allergen testing, mold testing, VOC testing, chemical testing. And then we also provide not only education, but solutions for that, because technology plays a big piece in that. Not all technology is great. I'm very particular about what we utilize here, but we do use UVC technology. We do use really state-of-the-art ultrafine particle filtration technology. I think that we use some of the best filtration available, and then of course ventilation to increase airflow.
So do you go to these places with, I guess, baggage, bags full of testing equipment? Is that how it works?
We used to, back in the day, we did a lot of testing, on location, which we still do. But now we have, and I have it here. So we developed all kinds of testing kits for clients. So this is the Examinaire, and it comes in a box like this. And inside there's a pump and cassettes. And a homeowner can take all these samples themselves right in their home. It's exactly what I would use in the field, no different. So this is a standard air quality pump. So they order the kit. It comes with instructions, and then they can take samples, and it comes back to our lab, and within 2 days we have the results. So it's fantastic because, I obviously investigate homes all over the country. And then, currently I'm doing a house in Australia. And so with Zoom and all the technologies, we can see what's going on and really get a good assessment, because we can do the indoor air quality piece. And then we can also look and see through, all the technology. So it's amazing.
Sure. How do you use it? You take it, you turn on the pump, and you go from room to room? Or do you do different parts of the house and have separate samples from each part of the house?
Exactly. So like this particular kit has 4 samples in it. So you're going to do one as your outside sample. That tells you what's naturally occurring in the environment, because there's mold everywhere. That doesn't make it bad. What we're looking for is species that are different from outside, or species that are water damage indicators, like things like Stachybotrys, Cotomium, Eulicladium, the ones that are the toxic molds. So you take a sample outside, one in your basement, one on the first floor, one on the second floor. I'm just using if you had a 3-story location. Or you could, if you had a ranch, you would do different locations. You can also order extra cassettes when you order it. So if you have a bigger home, because not everybody has the same size, you can order more or less. The basic kit comes with 3. So one on each level. And then we analyze everything from dust mites to dander to all kinds of proteins to building materials, fiberglass, cellulose. And you have the option with it to do just a mold and allergen panel, or you can do a deep dive into like particulate counts and different breakdowns, fireplace soot, all that kind of stuff. So this gives you a really good analysis for $400. I mean, you can't beat it. You're getting a IAQ professional analysis, and you can do it yourself. So
that's great. That's pretty incredible. When I was starting to do this work that I developed, KST, we would ask the body, what does it need? And surprisingly, sometimes we would find out just by asking, yes, no questions using binary biofeedback. I remember one case, a doctor, I got a patient who was suffering from a lot of health problems, and I got that it was at his work, and it was his carpeting, as weird as that might seem.
No, not at all.
You can actually ask the information field, you could say, or the body, asking the body. Or anyway, I said, I'm getting that underneath your window at work. There's a problem in the carpeting. And he looked at me like I was crazy, because who picks that up from just talking to somebody and doing a few simple tests? But he went there and he pulled up his carpeting just to probably prove me wrong. And there was black mold underneath. Turns out that the window had a little leak, and it had been dripping into his carpeting without his knowledge. And
exactly.
That impressed me. And I said, so I hear a lot about black mold. What would you call that? I'm sure there's a technical word for it.
And I always like to correct people too, because people always say black mold is bad. That's not true. Molds come in all different colors. They're black, they're green, they're gray, they're white. And just because you have black mold doesn't mean you have toxic mold. So to differentiate, there's 3 things molds do. So it's that fuzzy thing you see growing on a piece of fruit or in your shower. That's the spore. That spore contains a protein and a beta-glucan. Both cause inflammation in the body. About 20% of the population has allergens to mold, which is not that high. So it's not always the spore itself that causes the problem. The next thing that spore does is it produces a VOC, just like paint cans. So it sits there and it breathes in and out and does its whole funky thing, and it puts VOCs into the air, which is called an MVOC. So now we've got this spore that causes inflammation. Now we've got a spore that causes a chemical compound to be released. And then thirdly, If you have toxic molds that we talk about, like Stachybotrys and these molds that can produce a mycotoxin. So if you and I are molds, not every mold has the ability to produce a toxin. Some of us don't. You may be able to, and I can't, but some do. And when they do, then they start putting that into the air. And that's a little tiny particle like COVID. When you talk about COVID-19, this is what we're talking about, like ultra fine, less than a micron, big particles that sort of disperse themselves throughout and make you really sick. And so you'll often hear stories like someone says, oh, well, I had a mold problem. We cleaned it up. I'm still sick. It's not from the mold itself anymore. It's the leftover mycotoxins that can be there that can be a problem. So because they cause all this mayhem, that's what makes them so bad. And that's why you should test for it. And that's why you need to evaluate your home every 3 years or so to see what's happening.
How do people prevent this from happening in the first place?
I think the cheapest and easiest thing to do is to go to Home Depot or Lowe's or wherever you want to go and pick up a hygrometer. Just something that tells you temperature. I usually have one on my desk and I don't have one. It says temperature and relative humidity. And that's going to say, it's going to be a percentage. So your relative humidity is 30%, 50%, 80%. And you want to stay between 30 and 50% in your house at all times. You can go a little bit over every once in a while to 55%. But generally staying that 30 to 50 range. And this is so key, and it's so easy, and it's free, and it doesn't cost anything. And you get a dehumidifier or you get a humidifier and you just stay in this range. And so what happens is when you go outside the range, what happens? Mold says, hey, I'm gonna form here. I've got moisture source. I've got water. I've got all the things I need. This is great. Dust mites start forming because they like the moisture. VOC chemical compounds actually are exacerbated because of moisture. So if you have more moisture, you'll smell things. You'll often hear people say, oh, I've got a smelly house. I don't like it. Most of the time, their relative humidity is too high. And then things like COVID. COVID now we know in the last, it's been about a month or so, the studies have shown us that humidity impacts COVID. So if you breathe out spit or you cough or sneeze and the humidity is high, that virus will hang in the air much longer. So humidity is key, and just by controlling it, you can have a healthy home. Very simply, you don't end up needing me. It's when you don't do that is you end up with me in your house.
Well, what are some of the signs that a person would need you?
I think monitor your relative humidity and see if you're constantly over 55%, you're at 65, 75, 85, you've got a moisture problem. If you've got a moisture problem, chances are you've got a dust mite problem, you have a mold problem, you should probably be testing. If you've had any kind of flooding, if you have a basement and you need to check it, you do a mold test. And you don't have to use me first, you do a test, and then you find out, how's my air quality? Is it okay? And then you can go to more severe measures of hiring a consultant, whether it's me or somebody else, or getting mold remediation. But you want to keep a generalized test. I test my house every 3 years. And I use the same kit. I mean, I developed it and I use it because it's great and it's cheap,
Wow, that's pretty nice. Actually, it's very nice marketing.
Thank you.
Is this your invention?
Yeah. We, the original pump, we started in 2005. And so we worked with another company, and then they decided they were the manufacturer of a pump. So they decided they didn't want to do the, manufacture a kit anymore. And so then we took it over and revamped it and did everything and got new pumps and cassettes. And here we are, many, many moons later.
Wow. Well, this sounds like a real needed industry. And
It is.
Why are so many people now sick with it? Is it because of the tighter buildings? Even in old buildings, do you find problems with that?
I think it's a lot of things. It's the building for sure. The quality of the chemicals and the products, that we've used has lessened tremendously. You've gone to engineered flooring. You've gone to, instead of real wood and stone and brick and breathable and lathe and plaster, now you've got synthetic flooring, synthetic windows, vinyl. Vinyl doesn't breathe, then it promotes mold growth. And it's all of the synthetic, cheaper building materials. And I'd love to say sometimes we do have technologies that work great, but a lot of the building industry has cheapened. And unfortunately, it's created a lot of problems besides tightening. It's just gone to cheaper materials that hold on to the moisture. If you have a floor that's all glued together in pieces, what happens when it gets wet? Doesn't do so great. But if you have a tree or a piece of wood and it gets wet, it naturally has the ability to dry out and adapt more so. So, yeah.
Wow, we've met the enemy and he is us.
That's right.
We're killing ourselves.
That's right. We are. I mean, it's, it's sad. I'm not a doomsday person, but I mean, I see a lot as an environmental health professional. And when you start to really see it, there's so much out there that we've done to ourselves. Absolutely. And, my job is to kind of bring it to the forefront and get people educated and have them start looking. I don't really want you to live in a bubble. That's not what I'm saying, but I'm saying be selective about the products you choose, read about things, learn about things, educate yourself. Say, if I'm going to use this type of flooring in my home or do construction, what am I putting in there? How does that impact me? And then make an educated choice.
Now, let's say you buy, I remember when we had our house and we bought carpeting and they said, you got to let it outguess for a few days. Or we had walls painted. They said it should outguess. Does it always outguess or does it sometimes never leave?
Sometimes it never leaves, depending on the product. A lot of the companies too, like carpeting, for example, a lot of the carpet manufacturers have stopped using formaldehyde in the carpet, but the colorants or the backing or the fiber that goes under the carpet, they still use formaldehyde, right? So it's a mixed bag. Like even though one company says they don't use it, the products that go into that carpeting may use it. Also with paint's an interesting bird in itself. When you paint, the chemicals actually stay around for about 18 months, sometimes longer, sometimes 3 years.
Wow.
And we see this. You don't smell it any longer, or you become what I call nose blind to it, but it's there. And so that's why when people go crazy and they start doing all this remodeling all the time, they love to paint. It's not good. You really want to try to avoid that as much as possible because it does stay around for much longer than you realize, for sure.
We have a fireplace and we have a lot of wood in the background. Trees have fallen down and we got a lot of, cut them up and split them. But I remember when I was talking to one guy, we had some wood and I said, can we burn this? He said, no, it was pressure treated.
That's right.
He said, you're going to have big problems. Don't burn that. You'll get
That's right.
And
so that's another example of the cheaper products that we've gone to, right? For decking, we've gone to all this lumber that's pressure treated. And then that also affects how you build. So like if you use traditional, let's just say use copper flashing or you use aluminum flashing, it'll eat away at the product. So you have to be careful what you use with it. And you have to know, what materials go with what. And instead of just wood, right? You don't really have to worry about that. But when we use products that have chemicals in them, they combine with other chemicals. So
you would recommend people staying away from pressure treated wood, even outside, inside, doesn't matter?
I mean, it becomes an expense, now with COVID, that's why people go to these products, right? They go to all kinds of different deck materials that are made from PVC and vinyl because of the cost. And wood is 6 times the amount it was. I mean, if you go build a deck now, if you try to during COVID, it's $60,000 to build a deck now, depending on the size, just because of wood is so expensive. So, outside, I'm less concerned, but I'm still an environmentalist at heart. So I'd like to see traditional product, but especially inside, when you're in an environment where you're closed in with it, you really have to be more selective. Lower VOC, healthier product.
So I see it as a factor. Like some people, to me, disease is multifactorial. You get stress from here and in here and in here and here and here, and it'll build up eventually. And this is one of the stresses that people should be aware of to see if it'll make a difference in their lives.
And what we see too is traditionally when I see a sick person in a home, it's what I call a trifecta, meaning, your body is pretty resilient at dealing with things. But if you put 3 things in there, so say I put high VOCs and you've got toxic mold, and let's just say maybe you have a radon problem, you're going to see people who have immune disease or cancer, or it's always when I go into a home where someone's sick and I get called in, I've done 30,000 houses in my career, you get called into these environments, there's always multiple things happening, like you're saying, at one time. They've got multiple bad environmental factors happening.
This sounds like it's something everyone who's buying a new home should have, your product.
Yeah. I mean, everybody should be testing in general. I mean, and more so education, getting aware about indoor air quality, changing your filters regularly, making sure you're staying up on your HVAC system, which is a mold, mold loves to go into an HVAC system, servicing your stuff, making sure that, you're using hardwood and no carpeting. And, it's an education process too. It's learning to live in a different way that we're not used to.
I miss the old radiators.
They're the best. I have one right here, right next to me. in my
I,
office. Yeah.
I never liked the central air. I think it's really unhealthy.
It is, because when it disperses, it blows air through versus a convection system like you're used to with a radiator. Radiator just diffuses heat up in a very soft manner. But what people don't understand is when you have like an HVAC system, you're blowing things. And so that's why COVID too has become a big issue, because a lot of these commercial spaces and restaurants and all of this have forced hot air systems. So when they did studies in Wuhan, right off the bat, they had people covered, they had people social distancing, and people in the building got sick. And they said, well, how did this happen? Because someone was sitting next to a return vent where the air is being sucked in and then recirculated through the building, and they coughed or sneezed. Goes through the vent, back into the space, and people get sick. That won't happen with as much with a radiator system like you're talking about.
Yeah, I miss radiators. What about people that have had carpeting, and what can they do? They still have the carpeting, they still have the crappy wood or fake wood.
Fake wood, yep.
What would you say to someone who's now living in a house that has these problems or these?
Well, I always say try to, budget to make changes. That's the first thing. Start, even if you start small, it makes a big difference. And you know this from being a health professional. You don't have to do everything at once. I mean, people get overwhelmed and they think that, oh, I've got to do everything and that's the reason I'm going to get well. Every little thing that you do to lessen a burden on your body is tremendous, and the body will thank you for it. So start small. If you have carpeting, for example, start using a HEPA vacuum. Don't, get a really good vacuum, invest in a vacuum that's going to be able to vacuum the carpet effectively, that's got a sealed system, so you're not vacuuming and then redistributing all the dust and dander back into the environment, which a lot of these vacuums do. Yeah. I like the Miele's, the Sebos. A lot of the German companies make great vacuums that are sealed. So, you start doing that kind of stuff. With the flooring, you work with what you have, and you test your indoor air quality, you test your formaldehyde levels. It's not an expensive test. It's $100. You test and see, hey, do I have high formaldehyde? And then you can invest in doing ventilation. You can invest in, opening your windows more, making sure that you are, having that house breathe better. So a lot of it isn't always expense. It's just getting educated about what you have and then making some changes and how you live.
Are you the person that invented the term sick building syndrome?
No, that's been around for a long, long time. I mean, I've been in the business 20 years, so that's going way back, probably 25 years ago.
What percentage of buildings do you think are sick, or making people sick, that is?
Oh God, it's got to be a 95%. I mean, it's really bad. I mean, I've seen 30,000 houses in my career. Every time I walk into a house, it's just like, I'm like, I can't believe it. And because houses are just like a plethora of problems, right? There's so many things that can go wrong. And if you don't maintain your house properly, and you don't keep your plumbing right, and you don't, constantly vacuum and clean, and you've got tons of occupants in the house, and your ducts are dirty, and you don't have UV technology, and it goes on and on. So it's just, and I learn more as I go too. Like, I'm just like, I can't believe it. So I think, very few people live in a good house, but the people who do live in a good house tend to be healthy if their immune systems are good.
I'm thinking about moving to a cave because
no, don't do that. See, moldy.
A cave is moldy. Don't move to a cave.
No, don't. And it's funny, you can have a healthy home no matter where you are. Like, I've had clients who have moved out to Pahrump, Nevada, and they're like, that's it. I'm moving out. I'm chemically sensitive. I don't want to be exposed to VOCs. And they move out there, and we've tested their air quality, and guess what? They still have 250 volatiles. Because when you pump gas, for example, if you go to a gas station, you get gas, and you're not touching the gas, you don't get gas on you, just the fumes, that stays on you, and you go and sit down on your sofa when you get home. Or you sit in your car, and then you sit somewhere else, or you put your clothes in a laundry basket. And these things get carried with us throughout our environments. And so even if you, yeah.
I mean, they tell you when you have dry cleaning fluid, go to a dry cleaning to take out off the plastic bag and let them air out for a while.
Exactly. At least 24 hours. And these things stay with us. I mean, it's the same with proteins. If you go to the grocery store and you get around people who have cats and dogs, you pick it up on you and then you bring it home. So we're not a hermetically sealed, we're a community. And so that's why I try to teach people, we all affect each other. And we need to all be doing this as a collective. Otherwise, it really doesn't work. You have to be conscious as just humanity that we impact each other with chemicals and pollutants.
You should write a book on this. This is great.
Thanks.
Really, people don't know
Yeah.
this. I know that today people seem more sensitive to allergens than ever. We know people that have horrible sensitivities to electricity or
Yes.
to everything. And it seems, I found in my experience that the more toxic a person is, the more sensitive they are to
Yes.
environmental toxins. So
100%. And the more, with 5G and everything we use is Wi-Fi, or, I mean, all of this is infecting us. You can't ignore it. I mean, anybody who says that doesn't affect you, they're just not even being scientific. We know these things do. I had a client, this is so interesting. And, your clients push you. And I think you could relate to the story very well because
I learn everything from my patients.
right.
Yeah.
It's and then you kind of, what we are is like a big a funnel, if you will, right? And so we get all this information kind of funneled into us. And if you're a good health practitioner or a consultant or whatever, you take that information and you allow it to funnel down, and we can disseminate it, kind of put it together and say, hey, and that's what makes what you do or what I do so important. It's like we're just this giant funnel. So I had a client who came to me and they said they had lymphoma, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. They'd gone to their doctor and they said, look, I really think I was exposed to glyphosate, which is Roundup. Are you familiar with the herbicide?
We have Stephanie Seneff from MIT, who has been writing many papers on glyphosate Roundup. And it's horrible. The stories are terrible.
So I had a client and they said, look, I really think I was exposed to Roundup. And I looked at their house and I said, they hadn't used it in 2 years. And I said, there really isn't an indoor air quality test. At this time, there was nothing to test. And I said, we'll test the water because that was available to us. And it wasn't in the water. And he said, look, I really think it's here. What can you do? And I said, nobody's testing for it. The FDA was testing for it in food. But I was the first person in the country that I am aware of that tested for it in the air. And so what we did was we took a filter from their HVAC system and I sent it to California, and we designed a whole test for glyphosate. No one had ever done this before. It was the first one. And sure enough, after figuring out a way to test for it, it came back that he had glyphosate exposure and AMPHA, which is a metabolite. So when glyphosate breaks down, it breaks down into another chemical compound. So it had been there a while. So what we deducted was that this was in his home and it had come from his neighbor, was out there spraying constantly.
Oh boy, you don't know. Yeah, your neighbors. We don't think of that.
And that's the only really logical way. And so we did provide the information to him, and he used it for a lawsuit. He's in the class action suit. And so he pushed me, I would have never, I was like, it's not available. I can't do this, but we did it. And sure enough, there definitely was a link there. We don't know if it caused it per se, right? But there was a pretty good
you don't want
chance
that around no matter what. So
right.
It was smart. We're sort of run out of time, but can you tell people how to best reach you?
Sure. Healthy Home Expert, so it's behind me, .com, or you can type in My Healthy Home. We come up all over the place. So, we've been doing it 20 years. So if you type in Healthy Home, My Healthy Home, Healthy Home Expert, and I encourage people just to go on our site. We have a lot of media things just like this. We put up your podcast if you give it to us, and people can learn about their environment. And, if you're exercising and you're eating right and you're doing chiropractic, you're doing things and you're still not getting better, look at your environment as another outlet for sure.
Absolutely. Thank you. This has been really very
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Wow, you were in the right place at the right time, aren't you?
I don't know. It's crazy. It's too crazy. It's sad that the pandemic forced us to have to learn this way. We've been saying this for 20 years, but now everybody understands that your environment, you can be exercising, eating healthy, and then look, your environment throws you a virus. So that's why it's so important that we look at environment all the time to really be healthy as possible, for sure.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. And
thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. It was a pleasure meeting you, even though it's not it's
the best terms.
But we will send out the transcript to you for your.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you again.
Okay.
This show has been produced by Market Domination, LLC. To discover how you can have your own show completely done for you and turn it into a real published book and become the authority in your marketplace, go to www.marketdominationllc.com/podcast offer.